First of all, welcome back to McGill. You spent
Thanks.
a lot of time here, 1971 to 83?
Yes, that's correct.
What all degrees did you get here?
Well, I started off in 1971 in the McGill CJEP program, so I actually got a DEC was my first degree, and then I went from CJEP at McGill to doing my Bachelor of Science at McGill, went on in the physiology department to do a master's degree, and then was accepted to medical school in 1979 and finished in 83. It was an amazing experience, and I'd love to come back and do it again.
I'm sure they'd love to have you. Now, in 1992, your career took a turn that I'm sure you could never have imagined.
1992 was a funny year for me. I was director of the Department of Emergency Services at Sunnybrook Health Sciences Center in Toronto. And all of a sudden, now for something completely different, I applied to become an astronaut and was successful in being able to do that. It was a dream that I'd had from the time that I was 7 years old in 1961, watching the original Mercury astronauts go into space. But as a Canadian, I thought, I'm never going to have a chance to do this. The only programs that were in existence in those days were NASA, the US space program, and the Russian space program. So I thought, how could I, as a Canadian kid, ever grow up to fly in space? And lo and behold, things changed. Canada became a major spacefaring nation, and I was able to fly in space as a Canadian astronaut on 2 missions.
But there were 5,330 other applicants for what, 4 positions?
People often joke with this. You know, they say there are 5,300 people applied for 4 positions. What's not generally talked about is 600 of those applications came from kids less than 10 years of age.
What do you think made you stand out?
You know, it's hard to know what made me stand out. I'm a very passionate person. I love science, I love medicine, I love the concept of humans exploring space. And I think when I applied in 1992, I looked at this as a dream that I wanted to be able to have come true, but I had a great job, I had a great career. Leaving medicine to go fly in space was a remarkable experience, and people say to me, wasn't being an astronaut the best career you've ever had? And I say, you know, it's great, but being a physician was also really incredible as well. So I had the best of both worlds. Whether I got in or not, I loved what I was doing.
And in '98, you went on your first shuttle mission. Can you tell us a bit about that? You do extensive training for this, but despite all the training, did anything once you finally get up there really surprise you, something that you weren't anticipating?
My first space flight was called Neurolab, and it took place in the spring of 1998. We launched in April, landed in May. We trained for 2.5 years for this flight. It was an amazing experience. I was a neuroscientist in space, using many of the techniques that I learned as a graduate student here at McGill. We were doing these experiments in space. All this time in training, we're focusing on the payload, but the experience of being in space was truly unique. You arrive on orbit. How do you brush your teeth in microgravity? Simple things like that. You've got toothpaste and you're going, okay, now how do I get this on the toothbrush? And what do I do when I've got a mouthful of toothpaste? Where do I put this? There's no sink that I can spit this into. So it was really interesting that we were really well trained on how to operate the shuttle, really well trained in how to do science in space. But little questions like that, we had to turn to our colleagues that had been there before and say, how do you do this? How do you make this all work?
So you're squeezing the tube and it's sort of coming out and your brush is chasing the toothpaste as it comes out?
Indeed, that's exactly what happens. The toothpaste is kind of hovering in midair and you can scoop it onto your brush. It's even more exciting when you have peanut butter and you put a knife into the peanut butter and you grab it and you pull half the jar of peanut butter out with you because of the surface tension between the peanut butter itself, the viscosity of it. So you learn very quickly what it's like to be in space where there is no up, there is no down. You're not really experiencing the force of gravity.
Oh, interesting. What was liftoff like?
Liftoff is a ride of a lifetime.
3, 2, 1. And liftoff of Space Shuttle Columbia on a mission expanding our knowledge and understanding of the human nervous system.
You have 7.5 million pounds of thrust that take you from being stationary to 8.5 minutes later, traveling over 8 kilometers a second. You snap your fingers, the space shuttle has gone 8 kilometers. A rifle bullet travels around 1 kilometer a second. So we're traveling 8 times faster than a rifle bullet, and there's no question in your mind that there's risk associated with this. I was lying on my back, looking out the overhead windows on the flight deck of Columbia on my first space flight as one of the flight engineers, and I'm thinking, wow, what a beautiful day for a launch. It's T-minus 30 seconds, we're counting down, we get to T-minus 15 seconds, and at that point I have this huge reality check that I'm about to sit on top of this controlled explosion and hopefully end up in space, and we don't really know how this is all going to work out. We've got our fingers crossed, but there's no question in 15 seconds I'm going to be going someplace really fast.
Before you take off, the night before, I mean, what goes through your mind? What are you kind of hoping, never mind the experiments, but the personal experience and seeing Earth from a distance and just that whole sort of almost philosophical trip? What were you thinking of the night before as far as the meaning it's going to have for your life?
Yeah. You know, the night before a launch, you have different emotional feelings. And what happens is we will go out to the launch pad as a crew and we bring our spouses with us. And we walk around the base of the orbiter. The astronauts are all looking up at the space shuttle thinking, tomorrow I'm going to climb on board, I'm going to wake up on Earth, but I will go to sleep in space. I'll be experiencing something that so few humans on our planet have had a chance to be able to experience. The spouses, they're all walking around the space shuttle looking up, thinking to themselves, every part went to the lowest bidder. So our perspectives are really quite different. As astronauts, we're able to experience the incredible majesty of what it's like flying in space. For our spouses, they're hoping and praying that it will all work well and their loved one will be able to come back and safely at the end of the mission and join them a couple weeks later.
Oh, thank God you did. So you did a lot of experiments in that first shuttle mission. You mentioned Neurolab. I read about baby mice just barely born going into space at a time when they're going to learn to walk and how zero gravity affects it. Can you tell us about some of the experiments that you did, and as a physician now, are you seeing some of the applications of what was learned there sort of being transferred today into medical care?
Yeah. On Neurolab, we were doing experiments to study how the brain reacted, how it adapted to this unique environment. When we send humans to space, it's remarkable how quickly the physiology of all the different organ systems in our body adapts or acclimates to this new environment. One of the things that we discovered was this concept of neuronal plasticity, which I started learning about as a McGill undergraduate student and graduate student in neurophysiology. This concept is much more profound than we realize. And that what we learned on Neurolab is that the brain adapts very quickly to being in space. Not only do the processes of the brain change, but the connections between individual nerve cells in the brain change in response to being in microgravity. This would be the equivalent of a motherboard of a computer rewiring itself under certain conditions. So this concept of plasticity, we're now beginning to get greater insights into this and hopefully be able to use this understanding clinically for patients who suffer from stroke, for patients who suffer from Alzheimer's disease or other conditions affecting the nervous system.